15 seconds. Anything said after that will not be regarded by the panel because I'm going to unmute myself to say to stop. So if you don't like being interrupted, please just do it too. Yeah. Also, let us know how you want to appear to be asked whether verbal or chat. Please be mindful not to interrupt and badger so we don't have equity concerns at this time of this tournament. And good luck, everyone. Let's welcome the first proposition speaker to open this debate. Here.
Okay, just a second. Okay. All right. So I use any pronouns and I prefer verbal POIs. Those who feel lonely interact more with the wrongdoings of society than this form of comforting art. Therefore, on weighing, we prefer something that allows them to better accept a larger majority of life rather than get stuck in those little moments when they can interact with this art where their loneliness creates a vicious cycle. That is our stance in this debate. With that said, in my speech, firstly, 3 points of framing, followed by 1 substantive on how it creates a vicious circle of loneliness. Firstly, then, what is outcast art? We're telling you that the general theme we see in it is the fact that there's a conflict between man and society, right? The fact that we have Joker, who has been wronged by society, Creep, where I'm a weirdo and everybody else is normal, all of these themes in which I feel lonely because I'm different from society, because I'm an outcast, right? Secondly, obviously, the dominant feeling that is pushed within this form of art is loneliness, and that's primary over other feelings like sadness, like optimism, like anything else of the sorts. And thirdly, finally, on outcast art, we're telling you that the focus is pushed on the sentiment of loneliness that the protagonist feels, right? Not towards accepting the fact that society sucks. The fact that Joker doesn't laugh at how bad society is and accepts it for what it is, rather, accent is placed throughout the entire movie at how he's lonely, he feels unsatisfied the whole way, and he ends up not progressing towards throughout the entire movie. Secondly, then, who consumes this art? 2 points here. Firstly, we're telling you that it's people who relate to this feeling of loneliness. But why are these people so prevalent in society today? We believe it's a majority. Firstly, because we simply lived very busy lives. We have a lot of jobs, we have a lot of work that we have to do, so we have much less interaction with other people, with things that we might want to do, like our hobbies and so on. Secondly, simply because society is so very competitive, right? We see a lot of other people as enemies, we feel alienated from them. But secondly, even if it comes to people who don't necessarily feel loneliness, they oftentimes still end up interacting with it, right? Because it becomes mainstream, it becomes popular, communities are formed around it, and you end up listening to it nonetheless. Lastly, on framing, regarding how exactly do we see impacting this debate? We're telling you that we're talking about an art motion, right? And art affects people in subtle ways. It's their emotions, their feelings, their view of the world. So therefore, we believe that we should focus on the fluffier side of this motion, right? Art doesn't push people into huge things like creating an entire new social movement, things like that. With that said, first substantive on how it creates a vicious circle of loneliness. And first thing we must ask ourselves, what exactly is loneliness? We're telling you, and the way we choose to define it is that it is a feeling of lack, right? You feel like you lack someone who could care for you. You lack the dream career you've envisioned since you were young, right? But very importantly here is that this lack is a need for you, right? It cannot solve itself on its own. You need something to fill in that void, and I'll nuance this a bit more later, right? It's exactly why a few months after your breakup, after the initial sadness has gone away, you probably seek a new relationship, trying to find someone, because that's a void that cannot solve itself on its own. It needs a solution. But a very, very important nuance here is the fact that loneliness is a very different emotion from sadness. Sadness is losing something important, and very importantly, not being able to get it back. It's grief, it's mourning. To make it a bit less abstract, when we break up, in the beginning, we feel sad because we feel like we've lost that person and it's something that I cannot get back. I need to sit with that emotion. I need to simply accept it, grieve it. There's no way of, I don't know, maybe filling in that void or forming a solution because there is no solution to grief, to sadness. But then, after that goes away, loneliness kicks in. It's your need for a relationship, not for that person specifically. And we believe that when loneliness comes in, it's a solvable emotion, right? The bottom line is loneliness, what this motion entails by talking about outcast art, is not something to be sat with. Rather, it's something that provokes change, provokes challenge. It's something that you need to do something about. But then how does this outcast art simply reinforce this feeling of loneliness rather than properly dealing with it and seeking resolution? Before I get into that, if there's any POIs. Okay, well, three mechanisms here. Firstly, we're talking about a form of aesthetic values. We're talking about the fact that outcast art appeals to your feeling of loneliness, right? I feel lonely and I see somebody else who's also going through that struggle, who's also doing the same things. We believe that ends up prolonging your emotion, of sadness. Why is that so? Because it's something beautiful. It's something touching that feels like our only escape when you feel this negative emotion. But what they're telling you is exactly the fact that it's just relief that it causes you, exactly because the focus is not on accepting society or finding a solution, but rather just the protagonist feeling lonely. Moreover, you start liking that music, right? You start listening it quite often. It reminds you of that feeling whenever you listen to it. You recall how lonely you feel, how unsatisfied you are with society, and so on. But secondly, and the second mechanism why it reinforces your feeling of loneliness is the fact that you start blame shifting, right? We're talking about a simple, natural human protection mechanism, right? When things go wrong, we don't like blaming ourselves. We don't like feeling like we're at fault because that harms us, that makes us feel hurt. Instead, we start shifting towards blaming those around us. We start shaming society. We start shaming everything and blaming what's outside of ourselves. And thirdly, the third reason why it reinforces our loneliness is because you oftentimes have communities that form around this form of art, right? It's people who listen to Radiohead and you discuss it with your friends, right? You attach more than just you when you feel lonely to that song, but rather your friends, things like that. And whenever you interact with those people, you have conversation, it brings you back to the emotion you initially felt of loneliness. The bottom line of all of this is simply the fact that you don't have entire agency when you listen to this loneliness music, right? It's music or art form or whatever. You don't just go for it and like temporarily only while you're feeling loneliness. No, it's something that prolongs your feeling. It keeps you from finding solutions. What's the impact of this? Simply the fact that it's a constant thing that comes up daily, right? It's a unit of negativity that comes up whenever you relax by listening to it, whenever you do all of these things. You become skeptical of others. You start blaming them. You feel a bit more cynic about the world because you feel like everything sucks and you're lonely and you don't enjoy it. It stops you from taking proper decisions, right? Because you feel like you're unconfident with yourself because everything around you goes wrong. What is our alternative? And why are we talking about alternatives on an opposing motion? Well, simply because we feel like people have a need for art, right? So if this form of art weren't to exist, they would probably turn to other alternatives. And we have two things to say here. Firstly, we believe people would likely seek more optimistic things, right? Why is this likely to turn to? Why are they likely to turn to this? Exactly because we need validation for our feelings, right? And besides just blaming our loneliness and being sad about it, another way of interacting with that feeling is accepting it and trying to move on with it. It looks like, I don't know, maybe listening to Eminem telling me that I can do it and I can do other things about it, that I can stop feeling lonely. These things are possible exactly because now we no longer exclusively focus on our biases of self-blaming, of blaming everything around us and feeling like we lack agency. But secondly, even if you don't buy our mechanism on optimism and opposition might push that we have to stay stuck with this emotion and accept it, whatever, we prefer other forms of art if we just want to sit with it, right? Something like sad music, because instead of simply reinforcing loneliness, it simply reinforces our feeling that we're not being okay right now. We don't feel happy, doesn't push this whole narrative of society is against us and everything sucks. This links back to our framing that I provided at the beginning, the fact that these movies tend to have a focus on the fact that I feel lonely, not that society sucks. We have feelings, people who can actually move on from loneliness, not get stuck on it. That's why we believe. Thank you.
Thank you, first prof speaker, for that very fine speech. Now let's have first opposition. Here. First opposition.
Okay, can I confirm I'm audible and visible?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, cool. Time begins my first word. I'll take PYs in the chat, please.
You're a bit far from the mic.
All right. Do not let proposition fool you. It is on their side where outcasts are invisible to society. Outcasts are definitionally minorities of the population because they are different from the vast majority of individuals. So it is on their side where they are shunned by individuals around them. It is on their side where they are forced to cope alone. We oppose this reality. I'm going to do three things in this speech. First, I'm going to provide a bit of setup for this debate. Then I'm going to respond to their claims. And then finally, I'll present two claims of our own. Firstly, on setup. The first thing I want to prove is why this art is likely depicted in a nuanced way. And there's two reasons. The first is that the individuals who produce the art itself typically directly relate to the art and have incentives to produce based on their own experiences and reflect in nuanced ways. Art itself is a big medium of expression for individuals. Oftentimes, artists get immense value out of self-reflection and therefore have very little incentive to make it just super stereotypical and super normalized. Secondly, the way that art gains popularity filters the best types of art that are most nuanced towards the top. And the reason is that, as they concede, individuals who likely listen to this art first usually relate to the art. So this is how hip-hop spread to mainstream. It was first popularized in African-American communities, and then because it was relatable, because it was popular, it spread elsewhere. So that is why the types of art we get are likely nuanced and beneficial. Secondly, what is the comparative on their side? And I'll note they have very little analysis here. We suggest that, as the motion says, these individuals are treated as outcasts on their side. Two reasons. One, there are natural reasons for social isolation on their side. So people around you, your classmates, your friends, your family, literally cannot relate to you. They perceive you as really weird. They cannot empathize with you. That is quite literally what this art is talking about. And that means that naturally individuals do not associate with you because they can't really understand you and they don't really perceive you as being cool. But secondly, there are competing social narratives and messaging that are harmful. It's on their side where your parents tell you to stay away from the weird kid in class, to stay away from the homeless guy on the street, where you see social outcasts in movies and they're depicted as weird. That is why on their side, Joker is just a weird villain. It's a madman who has no reason for being a weird individual, whereas comparatively on our side, people actually understand the reasons for Joker and the reasons why he does this. And importantly, these messages are internalized from a very young age on their side, and that means that oftentimes individuals react and ostracize individuals in harmful ways. On response, the first thing they say is that this reinforces loneliness and bad feelings. I have two responses. One is that they have no comparative. On their side, I would suggest society itself is what reinforces loneliness. When you have no friends, when you cannot talk to your family, when you're ostracized by the media, that is when you are lonely. It is not caused by the art, it is caused by society as a whole. Secondly, this isn't true. We will give substantial reasons why on our side, individuals are more heard when they directly engage with art, when they directly relate to other people, and society as a whole becomes more accepting. Secondly, they say that art makes you feel lonely and whenever you listen to it, it makes you feel lonely. I think they have a misconception of how people use art to understand their emotions. Art doesn't give people emotions. It allows individuals to figure out their emotions and clarify what their actual emotions are about, and therefore allows them to react better and cope in better ways. We have two arguments. One, outcast art causes broader social change, and second, outcast art de-isolates individuals. First argument on broader social change. This argument is quite simple, and I'll take your PY after this claim. There are three reasons our side is better. Firstly, our side increases the awareness of these social issues in the first place. On our side, there's a far lower barrier of entry to learn about these issues in the first place. It's far easier to learn about sensitive topics like mental health and depression when it's literally in mainstream art, when this art already has a platform. So Joker is a popular character already, and therefore people are likely to watch the movie. Radiohead is a popular band, and therefore people are likely to watch because they already have listened to these songs. Comparatively on their side, oftentimes you don't even interact with these things to a large extent. By definition, they are minorities of the population. People oftentimes hide their problems, and even if they don't hide their problems, you are reinforced to not engage with those individuals. Secondly, our side increases the understanding for other individuals. And the reason is that art itself conveys particular emotions. So in Dear Evan Hansen, for example, you can see Evan's frustration with social anxiety. The audience experiences his emotions through things like music, through the visuals, through the camera shots, through the shaking. Art makes you experience these emotions like they are your own. And importantly, this also reflects on under-focused aspects of individuals. So it's how people act alone, not when individuals are in society. And oftentimes that's really important because people act very differently in public compared to when they act alone. Comparatively on their side, number one, people oftentimes don't share their experiences in the first place. Society alienates these problems. You feel like there's a massive risk to you and your own relationships, that if you share your problems with your parents, for example, that you might be disowned, that you might lose your friends because it's not cool to be depressed. So even if you do share, oftentimes people around you won't understand, and therefore it is harmful. The third mechanism is that it humanizes individuals. So on our side, the story is isn't just about Joker and his mental health, but it's also about more normal and relatable actions. So, for instance, Joker had a very real relationship with his mother. He took care of her. She genuinely cared. In songs, the lyrics aren't just about the problem. It's also about more normal experiences. It's about the color of the sky or the little dates that you go on with individuals. So even if people don't directly suffer these same conditions, they still view these individuals as people and they feel more direct empathy. Two benefits on our side, and I'll take you after this. One, we get more social empathy, and that means people are better allies for the movement. It means parents can understand their children, classmates can understand their friends. The most proximate issues now are able to act as support networks, whereas comparatively individuals are afraid to speak out on their side. Secondly, society as a whole destigmatize these mental conditions. So you're more likely to get support for therapy, more likely to get therapy that is accessible in the first place, support systems like special education classes and ways to help them out. And importantly, I think our solution solves the root problems. The reason why people commit things like self-harm is not because of the problems, but because they feel alone, because your family and friends do not understand you and you cannot vent to them, because others around you treat you like garbage and make you feel bad about it. The problem for all other solutions is that mechanisms like therapy try to make you feel accepted, even though society does not accept you. That is why the only way in which you're able to get change is when society accepts these problems in the very first place, and that is a unique benefit we get on our side. PY.
Most of this art doesn't depict actual weirdness or outcast. These creators still have a financial incentive and things that are actually weird to the majority.
No.
They are not attractive.
You have a misunderstanding of the types of people who create these art. As we frame from the top, this is likely to be nuanced because the artists oftentimes relate directly to the experiences that they're talking about. And even if this isn't true, the types of art that funnel to the top are the beneficial ones. Argument two, this empowers and de-isolates individuals. The first thing to point out is that art itself is relatable and makes you feel heard. So even if in our worst case, parents or your close friends don't understand, just knowing that other people struggle with the same problems as you is really, really relieving. You are not weird. These outcast conditions happen to other individuals. It's good to know that you're not alone because, we're social creatures. We place emphasis on being like other individuals. And secondly, it creates places for discussion. So you can use a specific band or discussion forums to talk about your problems and, connect with other individuals within the community who likely have the same problems. What is the comparative on their side? I would suggest that there's a lack of positive coping mechanisms. On their side, you are rejected from society. You lack social connections and people around you who genuinely understand you. And it's true that some support systems exist, but oftentimes the best types of support systems are highly inaccessible. So the fact that therapy is highly stigmatized by society because society in large does not normalize, these sort of outcast characteristics. The fact that oftentimes mechanisms like therapy are very costly and take massive amounts of time. On our side, number one, these coping mechanisms become more accessible when there's more support for these things, when people feel genuine empathy for them. But second, you can resort to more accessible types of problems on more accessible types of solutions on our side as well. So you can talk to your family, you can talk to your friends when you feel like they actually are able to understand, when you feel like they will not stigmatize you and ostracize you because other individuals are like you as well. That is why on their side, individuals keep these problems to themselves. They use other outlets for their emotions like self-harm or eating. We stand for the individuals without anyone else to stand for them. That's why we're very happy to oppose this motion.
Thank you, first opposition speaker, for that fine speech. Now let's have the second proposition speaker. Here.
Okay, am I audible?
Yes, please go ahead.
Just a second. What stands true at the end of this round is that neither side fully changes society. What we believe is important in such a debate motion that tackles art and individual experience with it is rather the emotions these things spark. So in order for us to have any meaningful discussion surrounding a large-scale change of society, I think Team Opposition does need to do a significantly lot more of legwork. With that in mind, I'll interact with this in a second, but just let me give you a roadmap. I'll discuss multiple questions and input in comparative, specifically the questions of this round. Firstly, let us interact with the largest point and mainly what took most of their first speech, right?
We haven't seen much interaction surrounding our perception of emotions and internalization, but whatever, I'll interact with that later. Firstly, let us discuss on this point is that you're likely to be perceived as nuanced, as not stereotypical when this art is created, and therefore will lead to more acceptance from society as if that is the largest harm that can be solved. A few responses to this. We believe that specifically they analyzed here certain creators and also lacked a significant link, which is perception, which is how that art gets to people. A few responses. Firstly, on creators, we believe art is rather consumed and consumption. Art is rather consumed based on large-scale understanding of that art, it being relatable and marketable. Joker was so popular because it is a character that's very popular in white culture, right? In large-scale culture, we're talking profit incentives of studios to create more accessible art forms for people, right? People do consume the mainstream. We're not seeing people consume very complex art and so on. But more important than this, you won't want to really see it also because the population that is consuming that content doesn't necessarily have that incentive to digest it, right? We're not seeing homeless people being depicted as much as their suffering has gone through, right? We're not seeing nuanced broken marriages that are undergoing certain life stages, right? We're not seeing that necessarily. We're rather seeing pretty simple characters in that context. But even more important than this, the profit incentive makes it so that you make it more simple, you get to more individuals. That is the vast majority of our artworks, of the people who have the art, the power to distribute it, and so on. They play on a minority of cases. But second point here on that alienation and internalization, that is very important to mention here. Because two things to say here. Firstly, the ability to tackle those things, right? Let's say, I don't know, opening up about them to people, going to a psychologist, being more integrated in your family regarding this is not necessarily perpetrated by art. I think it's symmetrical on either side of the house, the options that you have. So we have to discuss specifically how art influences that thing. So the second response here, well, truth be told, if you're continuously reassured that those feelings are aesthetic, that they're worth romanticizing, that there's something that's a part of you, and that's very important, what is likely going to happen is that you're keeping it to yourself. Because that is a dialogue with yourself that reconfirms those feelings that society is broken, that other people are broken, and that you are fine. And that is exactly the problem, because it's a contradiction in their case. You're more likely to stay closeted the moment society is portrayed as bad, as not accepting you, and so on, especially as that content hardly gets to society in a very complex way. Now, let us discuss the further questions within this round that haven't been really interacted a lot by the team in opposition. What we believe, first one here, is that you shouldn't confine yourself with your state of miserable being, right? What they're trying to accentuate is specifically loneliness through these forms of art, that you are a victim of society, that you are the only one entitled to feel anything. Right. What is important here is that this is a constant reassuring of that harm, and it prolongs it. That is the harm that we're putting on the table in this round. What team up proposition believes, it's that you should try and move on and go beyond those difficulties, right? What does that mean? It is rather focusing, if society is so broken and doesn't like you, is focusing on yourself, of improving your financial situation, of becoming a more powerful member of society, of being a better self-person, right? Of focusing on your family, of being better at dating, anything of the sort. We believe it's significantly more important to tackle positive feelings than negative ones. But second point here, to extend on blame shifting. It has two mechanisms why this becomes significantly worse. Firstly, due to comfort, it's much more easy to shift the blame on others. And when art reconfirms that it's others who are to blame, you're not going to inflict upon yourself a harm that, yes, I am the one at fault. Secondly, it is coming to terms with your mistakes that is significantly altered by their side of the house. What does that mean? You're more likely to blame others and never assume that you might also be wrong. Because look, society is nuance. It's not always the outer world that is making your life more miserable. If you're bad at dating, sure, there might be some bad things that have happened in your past, but it's also probably likely you're going to change that. Society is not all that oppressive. Not everything is oppression, right? This makes them less able to cope positively with problems within their lives.
UI.
But to scale this up, sure, I'll take the point.
Just because society is broken does not mean people give up. All social change happens from discontent in the system, and that is what we allow on our side.
We definitely do not believe it comes from just discontent. I think it also comes through action. And I believe the problem that your team proposes on this round that has on their side is that you stick with the problem and not the solution, not trying to change that status of misery. I'll interact in the point with communities later on. But to scale this up, this becomes significantly worse also based on our previous mechanization. More consumption for the wider public and so on. That's why Radiohead is so listened to. That's why Joker is so popular, because they're more mainstream right now. Means more production, right? By studios, by people who want to make money. Therefore, more people listen to it. It gets to more backgrounds, right? To more multiple people. Algorithms in Spotify and so on recommend it to you. And lastly, if good music is made, therefore it gets to people who otherwise wouldn't get to. So they have that resort that is going to harm them significantly more. Therefore, bottom line, it's an increasing harm that happens in society when this exists. Later on, continuing on now on how positivity is rather a better solution. And what we believe positivity means is the same way we quantify the previous impact that I first told you, right? It's the short-term motivation, it's low-level motivation, it's low-level dopamine that is constantly based and put within your life, right? That makes you make choices. But to add upon this and nuance it a little bit more, that's especially prevalent in young individuals, right? Who consume art more and who are more likely to make life-changing decisions in that moment, right? Maybe their dating preferences, maybe the career they choose and so on. The difference it will make to have positive impact and positive music and so on is the fact that you're more likely to believe in yourself, more likely to believe that, yes, I'm going to get that job, yes, I can get it to that university, yes, I can get it with that girl. That is a difference these things perpetually can make within your life, to believe that, to have them as a safe space. But more importantly than this, to also scale up on communities. That's very important. Black Americans, for instance, use rap music, but they're not telling you you're a depressed and powerless individual. They're telling you you are King Kunta, you are the person who's financially empowered, who can make decisions for themselves, who has a wonderful community that deserves more. That is the difference. That's what also Roma people in Europe also sing about, right? That's what they produce art about money, about empowerment, about uplifting that situation, not about their very own misery. That's important because positive messaging encourages communities to exist and to be better, to stand together and to not lose their identity in times of darkness. On neither side do you really change the situation outside your very own personal life, but at least you can strengthen communities when they are in harm, right? And lastly, to discuss how this exclusive way of feeling good is not, how art significantly influences life and why it's so important. Firstly, because of emotional messaging. It relates to personal experience, therefore it activates reaction. Secondly, because we are based on emotion and we act upon it when we interact with that, we are bound to make decisions based on what we feel and our brain processes happen. Lastly, on exposure, be it friend groups, be it recreation, be it simply society that shows it to you, it's more likely for you to have that positive impact when it's more relatable, when it's more accessible, and we promote something that generally creates a better way for your life. What we believe, panel, at the end of this round is that whatever the causes may be, whatever your environment may be, the last thing what you have to do is to capitulate and let it defeat you. That's why positive art is the only solution for people with such backgrounds.
Thank you, second position speaker, for that very fine speech. Now let's have the second opposition. Here.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
All right. I'm not turning. Okay. Can I get time? Okay. So at this point in this debate, the proposition team only has one path to victory, which is to try to win on the contentious characterization that every person who listens to this song becomes more and more lonely. We are going to win this debate in two ways. We are first going to prove the broader societal impact that proposition does not challenge and why we're able to win on that and weigh it against the individual benefits. Secondly, we're going to talk about why this is a good way for individuals to cope. In terms of the broad societal awareness clash, our claim was very, very simple. It's that it raises social awareness and that leads to good outcomes. It forces society to acknowledge marginalized emotions, where many individuals currently feel very isolated, depressed, or misunderstood because of the fact that mainstream media often avoids discussing these emotions openly. And so grief art in these instances is actually very, very good for expressing the misunderstood and marginalized emotions of these people. Their response is this, right? They say there are profit incentives to make it accessible and therefore is not actually accurate. I just want to gut check this, that this is untrue. There's a direct correlation between being good and raw and having that good critique on society and profit. The reason as to why this happens is because, it is genuinely absurd that Proposition says that Joker is popular because it's part of white culture. No, I'm Asian and I watched it because it was praised for its critique on society. And so there's a direct correlation between being very, very good critiquing society and the amount of profit and reception it creates. If Outcast art were purely profit driven without truth, audiences wouldn't connect with it and wouldn't go to watch it in the very first place. That is why the long-term success of emotionally raw films, music, and literature shows that people relate to them because they reflect real struggles. Joker was successful not because it was applicable to the average person, but it was because it gave very, very good insight to the outcasts of society. What made it get there that would have never otherwise been accessed on their side of the house without this form of the art. The other example, like Creep in the Infoslide, is not relatable to the average person, but it's raw in the fact that it expresses the raw emotion, and that's why it appeals to people and why people listen to it. So again, it's not because, people don't listen and consume these arts because they relate to it. It's the fact that they want to see what are the real struggles of other people. There's a demand for raw and strong critiques, and that's what draws people in. But secondly, we would suggest that many creators are driven by experience and not just money. Many of the outcast artists create from personal pain, not just corporate demand, right? So large amounts of music and film and literature oftentimes originate from real experiences, and then financial success is a part of that, but it's not the motivation of that. So if you look at Kurt Cobain, for example, right? He wrote songs about alienation and depression from personal experience. He became really, really rich, and then he offed himself. So obviously the motivation is not with money or fame. It's the fact that he genuinely wanted to talk about these sorts of things. I'll take a POI after this point. So the weighing at the end of this theme is that on exclusivity, the only way in which society is able to understand these people, the outcasts of society or mental illness, is through this art. Otherwise, society will forever look down upon these folks because there's a lack of epistemic access. For the worst outcasts, these people are so isolated that the average person will never know what they go through on the everyday life. And so people don't know why they're weird. They'll never end up asking, and they're just going to be isolated forever. What films like Joker does is that it humanizes them. It shows their descent into madness, so the average person sees it and understands why things happen, and they become more empathetic and process. It does things such as destigmatize these issues. Not everyone has to be mentally ill to understand the Joker, but the average man probably struggles with mental illness and finds some sort of resonance in the Joker, and that stigma is broken because of the fact that it becomes mainstream. So Joker brings these issues to light. It shows that, these issues do happen and on a very, very large scale. So art is the only method in which these people are able to see these things. The films highlight, how neglecting mental health services and economic struggles leads to desperation and violence. And these critiques in society are brought up. Now, when school shooters come up and crash out like the Joker, the first cause of discourse is not blaming the person, it is examining their environment and why this person became like that in the very first place. Just look at the way that Joker has evolved through grief art. He initially went from a villain with no depth whatsoever in cartoons that has no societal impact, but the second they made a movie about his life and his struggles, people started to understand him as a character and in turn understand people who end up like him. Their response is kind of absurd. They say, you keep these emotions to yourself because society is broken and now you're demotivated. Just because society is broken does not mean people give up. If society is broken, we would suggest that, all social change happens from discontent within this system, as you pointed out in the PI. And so if people genuinely resonate with this, right, and see the issues, that leads to some sort of change or some sort of discourse that is positive. That's why Fight Club, a movie that was released over 10 years ago, its critiques on materialism and quotes are still used in discussions today. So if you want to weigh on why this theme is very, very important, awareness in all forms is a prerequisite to any form of progress. It promotes empathy as a society, it raises awareness for issues that were previously under the dark, and it normalizes the struggles that were once stigmatized. That is much, much more important than how people internalize it because of the fact that it solves the root issue of alienation, which is the lack of understanding and zero awareness about these things in the very first place. That's why these forms of art are so important. So even if they win the clash that perhaps it does reinforce worse feelings, we think that if society broadly becomes more accepting and empathetic of these people, the amount of support system, the amount of therapy, the stigma that exists in the status quo is more likely going to decrease, and therefore broadly these people improve. Before I move on to the second theme, I'd love to take a point.
If you portray the fact that you want to change feelings of aversion, of resentment, right? If art would illustrate properly the people who the majority resent, I do not think it's reasonable that they want to watch it because they do dislike them.
No, this is not true. If you look at every single instance of grief art, the majority of people who interact and consume with this art do not directly relate, but, they find some sort of meaning in seeing how other people, live, right? So, that's probably pretty important. Secondly, does this reinforce lonely feelings? Their claim is that people listen to the song and become even sadder. So perhaps they do listen to the song and become sad in the short term, but after watching, consuming this art or listening to the song, then what happens? Our argument was that loneliness actually worsens people when they feel unheard or misunderstood. And so what Outcast Art does is it gives people a voice and a way to process their emotions, and it validates their experiences rather than their comparative, which is that they bottle up their feelings. Now, look, they say their alternative is accepting and moving on and being optimistic. Genuinely just gut check this. They severely overstep on how people are able to deal with their issues. Not everyone can accept their issue and move on. Their most likely alternative is that they suppress it, they never talk about it, and they become even more sad. And so we think ignoring loneliness doesn't make it disappear. It resurfaces in other areas of life. The fact that you get depression now or unhealthy coping mechanisms. The reason why therapy is good is because you talk about your issues and you're able to express them. Instead, on their side, the worst things seep out in other ways of your life. And that's when the worst harms are reinforced. The reason as to why this is important is because people who feel alienated oftentimes struggle with feeling understood. What Outcast Art does, it provides a voice to their emotions and it validates their experiences. So the weighing becomes this. Emotional validation is the first step and prerequisite towards healing. To understand your feelings and when you resonate with the song is the only way to understand how to move on in the very future. You cannot move on if you do not make peace with your struggles, which is what happens on their side. There is no way for you to sort of think about why you feel the way you are without a form of art. Outcast Art provides an emotional mirror. It acknowledges their pain instead of dismissing it. Now, they say, you find people who connect through art and then I don't see how that's bad. Outcasts finding people to relate with and talk about this, it's probably good. They find communities and that leads to better outcomes for them because they don't feel as lonely, right? And so the reason as to why people go toward these form of art is to cope and fill a hole of understanding. If art is a method that validates your emotions, if that does not exist, the alternative is that hole becomes deeper the more and more you neglect, ignore it. So the end implication on this theme is that you cannot move on without confronting your issue. The only way in which you can confront your issue is to understand it. How do you understand it on proposition? I have no idea. That's up to the third to talk about. On our side, we thought that the ability to understand it came in the form of grief art. That's why we're very happy to stand. Thank you.
Thank you so much, second speaker, for that very fine speech. Now let's have the second position speaker. Yes, you are. Please go ahead.
Panel, the civil rights movement tried to show that people of color deserve university, not to be isolated, by showing examples of people who could succeed, of people who became engineers, teachers, through following it, not by showing the community that it was okay that they were segregated, that they were paying lower paid jobs, that they were unfairly treated. They accepted that they were treated as second-class citizens, and they tried to fight for it, not through messaging of contentness or trying to seek comfort in your situation. Will you actually improve? You improve when you recognize that you have a problem that ought to be changed. As such, panel, the main weighing of this debate is regarding the fact that these people live more in society than they watch this art. As such, they ought to seek a way in order to find more comfort in society, in interpersonal relationships, than just seeking, for example, comfort for all of their problems and issues in these types of art or music. They're going to be more exposed to the job market, to their friends around them, to their family. They're going to need to integrate, else they will have miserable lives. This type of art does not affect them. As such, to prove this, we needed to prove to you how art affects people. Op concedes this. Yeah, it influences the way that you think, the way that you interact with people. Secondly, to prove to you how Outcast Art reinforces these individuals' beliefs. And Op also concedes this by saying, yeah, these people feel comfortable, or these people feel a sense of belonging. Whenever you feel a sense of belonging in being an outcast, you're going to feel no discomfort in actually needing to change your condition. You're only going to feel it whenever you go out in society. So you're going to want to retract even more back to that art. But panel, people live in society. People need to interact with others. They're not going to have healthy lives otherwise. And thirdly, to prove to you that our alternatives are better and that they are likely to happen, we prove this to you firstly by telling you that whenever you're probably sad, you're going to watch sad types of art. That's not going to make you question society. It's going to make you realize, hey, I'm in a bad condition. And secondly, the other plausible reaction will be you listening to motivation traditional music, yeah? People of color listening to Tupac or to rappers or to hip-hops, first telling them that they can get better, or to Eminem, yeah? Celebrities culturally telling people to have hope, that they can rise from their social condition, and so on and so forth. This is the type of societal messaging that we want through our art. Considering that art has this sort of an intense impact at the end of the debate, we see that we win. But more than that, let us see what opposition does not understand, because they say that, oh, society is going to understand these people more, and so on and so forth on their side of the house. Panel, if society understood those people in the first place, then we wouldn't have the problem of these people being outcasts. These are outcasts exactly because they don't have friends, exactly because they have no one to relate to, and they're not breaking out of the bubble, yeah? They act as if there's a lot of people in society who are outcasts. No, these are a minority that is really, really hurt, and society is oftentimes not going to reach out to them exactly because those other people are also in their spheres of comfort, but those spheres of comfort are shared with more people, i.e. they have more friends, they feel better, they live better lives, and so on and so forth. They do not prove the delta for change on their side as to how these people are actually going to get motivated. They tell us, oh, but they depend on support systems and so on and so forth, but you're going to have only as much support systems, only as much people who are going to reach out to you. A lot of these people who are outcasts oftentimes don't know how to treat people or have bad attitudes, and instead of self-reflecting, they often turn in themselves and say, oh, society is the one that's bad, society is the one that's mistreating me, it isn't my fault. This is how they end up with having no friends, or with thinking that society is bad, yeah? People are not that dependent on support systems, but more than that, panel, they start from the premise wrongly that people cannot change themselves after all. And what we tell you is that people have agency. You can change your life in so many ways. Yeah, you can work more, you can get counseling, you can, for example, reconnect with your friends or make more friends. We're telling you that decisions that motivate what you do are also dependent on what type of art you romanticize. Whenever you romanticize this type of feeling of loneliness, you seek yourself in it. Yeah, you might relate to Joker and he might be a mainstream character, but is that really good for you? Yeah, probably the ones who made it made a lot of profit, but you're still an outcast in society. You still feel as though you're mistreated, and you're not trying to, for example, change your condition because you think that no matter what, it's all going to be the same. We'd rather people romanticize motivation, change, and the fact that they can actually work on themselves, because up until the end of the debate, they have not proven to us why these outcasts don't have agency and why they can't work more, or they can't work more on themselves. But more than that, let us look at some psychological analysis that they've also ignored, yeah? What you tell yourself that you are and what you find comfort like in your free time defines essentially who you are, yeah? Because, for example, if you are like a man who's struggling in dating, you have two options here. Either you improve yourself or you blame society, and you'll probably be blaming women, yeah? These are the types of comparatives and analogies that represent this type of art. This type of art is made for comfort, as all types of art. But what we're telling you is that that comfort is counterproductive. The main way is a short-term comfort when you listen to that art or when you watch that movie versus long-term discomfort whenever you get out into society. We'd rather these people feel discomfort when, for example, they're watching a sad movie that's, for example, making them realize their sad condition, or listening to music that, for example, is motivating them, because at least that will bring them the discomfort of actually trying to make change. Because in order to make change, you need to put in effort. You're only going to put that effort if you notice the problem in the first place. What they told us on their side of the house is that these people are not going to feel as though they have a problem, and society is not going to feel as though they have a problem. Panel, they are outcasts on both sides of the house. They've not proven to us up until the end how these outcasts change. Yeah, they've only told us, oh, society is going to understand them more. But society only has as much energy, and we can't just assume that everybody will be listening to outcast music. So let us flip their point here, because if, for example, society is polarized between like outcasts and people who are not outcasts, if these people don't listen to, for example, mainstream music, films, or other art forms, they're going to be less relatable to people who maybe they want to befriend in society. So you actually have even less people on their side who are going to listen out to you, who are going to be your support system as they claim. So probably if you listen to this type of art on their side of the house, you're going to be even more put down the path of loneliness, because it is harder for you to relate to people. It's really essential to relate to people, especially when making friends, because people connect regarding these types of experiences. Yeah, people need some sort of common ground. Whenever you seek that sort of uncommon ground of loneliness, you're only isolating yourself even more. That's going to cause harm on you. Yeah, these types of people oftentimes live less, have less friends, and this is accompanied by mental health issues. These types of harms ought to be recognized by them, and we don't only need external motivation. They've not proven to us how internal motivation on our side of the house is not, for example, stronger. All that they said is that they have, for example, some groundbreaking societal changes or societal impacts. No, panel, you cannot claim as far, right, that some sort of art is going to motivate everyone to help people who are outcasts. No, we'd rather these outcasts listen to something else that's probably going to cause internal change, because the weighing is you can be more dependent on internal change. It's caused by you and you control those factors, versus external change that is not so probable on their side of the house and who for other people need to put in their energy in order to save you. At the end of the day, the societal values that people value most are integration, solidarity, hard work, friendship. Isolation does not meet this. Whenever you romanticize isolation, you're going to be in opposition with the rest of society, and people are still going to consider you a loser. You're probably not going to have as many friends, and your life will be miserable. We don't want that. We don't want an art form that promotes it. Thank you.
Thank you, third prop speaker, for that fine speech. Let's have third opposition here.
Hello. All right, I'm just gonna assume you guys can hear me.
Yes, please.
All right, brilliant. Proposition loses this debate when they only engage in half of what this debate actually talks about. Because what they don't seem to realize is that people are not losing their friends because of the outcast music. It's that they never had friends to begin with. I have 3 questions in this speech. First, what does this art and media look like? Secondly, who does this debate impact and the individuals who are outcasts? And finally, how does this debate impact the way that society changes? First, what does this art or media look like? Government challenges that the inaccurate representation is because there's a profit incentive because you want to make it mainstream. Why is that untrue? Because note the analysis Terrence gave you in the first. Because you need to analyze how niche arts become popular in the first place. They need to be popular in their own community before they become mainstream in the first place. That's how every single niche community has existed. How C-pop, K-pop, or hip-hop has ever grown to be mainstream. This is important because this means that the art needs to be authentic in the first place to be rated by their community. So the music and the art that is the most authentic from the people who are outcasts are the ones that become popular in their community, then become popular in the mainstream. But also, I need to point out that this art isn't going to be making people more isolated or lonely for the average person, because there's obviously counter narratives that exist in the status quo that tell people that it's weird to hate on society and that it's weird to always be sad or gloomy. Obviously, this type of isolation they tell you doesn't really exist. That's why their characterization of how this art is created is not true, and why the analysis is true from our side. How does this debate impact people who aren't outcasts then? I want to first note, their entire case relies on a generally inaccurate characterization of who outcasts are, because not the majority of society are outcasts, nor are you the outcast because you got rejected by your girlfriend. That's not how it is to be in depression. That's not what it means to be someone who doesn't get accepted by society. The reason is very obvious, because the vast majority of people have coping mechanisms outside of outcast art. Your friends can cheer you up. Your family can make you happy. You only relate to Joker if you are a reject in society. This debate applies who don't have good families to go to, who don't have connections, on their alternative being escaping loneliness. But the people that we're talking about in this debate are people who can't access the alternatives that government tells you about. But even if this debate centers around the group that they want you to believe and the people that they talk about, we still win. Why is that the case? Because music is relatable, and you need to feel catharsis in that you're heard before you are ready to seek your friends or family in the first place. The problem with Proposition is that they identify that they have the capacity to do things, but they never identified the incentive to do things. This is important because people might have friends or family, but the reason that they might not reach out to those friends or family is because they feel like those issues are stigmatized. They don't want to dampen a mood at a party by crying about how they dumped their girlfriend. They don't want to talk about to their parents about the things that they happen in their life because they feel like their parents might feel shame upon them. Only on our side do we tell you that when you feel hurt, when you don't cope with self-harm, that is the point at which you can become a better person. But what did we say, and why is it the fact that outcast art is so important? Because a lot of people who can't have alternatives to cope need this cathartic music. The stakeholder that government misses are the people who don't have friends, who don't have family, who don't have jobs or connections like their alternative that they tell you about. We also need to note that these are the people who are the most impacted by this type of music. This debate isn't about people who have slight loneliness, given that a lot of them probably can seek the alternatives that they tell you about. It's the people who never had an alternative in the first place. So look, we think that the characterization government gives can be valid in many circumstances. So we'll take them at their very best and we'll be very charitable to them. So why were our impacts and our characterization more important that outweighed government side? We outweighed them because of vulnerability and scale. The vast majority of people panel that people listen to Radiohead or Outcast music are people in the trenches who seek other alternatives that haven't worked, that don't even have alternatives in the first place. But it is also the group that we talk about are the most vulnerable people. The average people in society who might feel a little bit lonely because they don't have a girlfriend or something or a date. Those people obviously have other coping mechanisms or won't seek very, very extreme types of ways to cope. The people that cut themselves in order to cope, who do drugs, who do self-harm, these are the people that our side is impacting. The catharsis that the music gives them is infinitely more strong and important. Before I move on, I'll be happy to take a POI.
Yes, this motion isn't exclusively about people who are actual outcasts. A lot of people feel like outcasts. They project this just because they feel lonely. And we've provided mechanisms on how blame shifting works. You have to address this key actor.
I did address it. So if you listen to what I said, I give you many reasons as to why your alternatives do not work. And even if your alternatives did work, our side was infinitely better. The reason why your outcast things don't work is because the average individual doesn't relate that exclusively to the music that outcast stuff has. So the average individual obviously isn't Joker, but what they can understand and what they can get out of it is that that Joker was someone that had a lot of struggles and they can get some valuable experiences from that. So the reason is obviously the vast majority of people don't want to be or feel like an outcast because that's stigmatized. That's obviously not something the vast majority of people want to be. How does this debate impact the way that society changes? So given we've proven to you that this type of media is going to be represented correctly, that this debate applies to the people we've told you about, how does this society change in the way that we've told you about? Proposition basically already capitulates this clash because they literally have no analysis or content on how society actually changes. The only response that they basically have is, oh, well, the civil rights movement and all of that, that type of stuff wouldn't have happened on our side of the house. But Proposition makes a bad concession here because they say that it's bad to critique society and that it won't lead to change. But if you just look at the way that society has evolved and the ways in which social movements have created in the status quo, that is clearly not true. These arts create critiques on society, and that changes the way the society views people and their outcasts. Their comparative is one in which they pigeonhole outcasts of society to stereotypes of being weirdos, which we think is infinitely more isolating. So 50 years ago, outcasts were used as comedic relief in TV shows as like, haha, these people are really, really weird, or as tertiary sidekicks that were just going to be the punching bag in a lot of movies. It is only going to create worse narratives on their side about people who are outcasts or weird people in society, while it is exclusively on our side when we tell people that it is wrong to look at outcasts as a certain way that we get actual change. So why is societal change very important? Because the civil rights movement didn't come across because people accepted that black people are second-hand citizens. It's because they realized that society is wrong, that they critiqued society, that they said that it's wrong that black people are segregated, or that Chinese people are segregated, or that Indian people are segregated. The weighing on social change is on prerequisite analysis here. Changing how society views outcasts or the depressed means more support systems. It means more motivational alternatives that Proposition assumes that just exist on their side of the house. The thing that we need to note is that the vast majority of people would seek the more healthy coping mechanisms if they could. I think the average person would do that. The problem is that those viable alternatives do not exist for a lot of people. That is the way in which we change this. We tell people that it is wrong to blame everything on the weirdos in society, that it is wrong to say that outcasts are completely wrong in society. That's the way in which we're able to change how society views outcasts. That the press means that they get more support systems and all of that. That alternatives that we do have exist. The way that we won this debate was threefold, and we proved each of our paths to victory. First, we proved that the art that existed was made well and in an authentic way. Second, we proved that the types of people, regardless of what proposition tells you, are going to be better on our side given their best case scenario. Finally, we changed the root of society that actually was the most important and the prerequisite to changing society for the better. For those reasons, we were proud to oppose.
Thank you, third opposition speaker, for that very fine speech. Now, going over to the reply, let's welcome the reply speaker from UP.
Wait, give me 1 second to get water.
Sure.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I'm going to start right now. 1 second. The reason why Proposition loses this debate is because throughout the series of characterizations that they made, they were incredibly unrealistic and had a very individualized understanding of what the round is going to be like. On our side, we're going to analyze the comparatives on Proposition and explain to you why on a societal and individual level, we're going to win this debate. I'm first going to talk about the societal change and what we get, because we think that is the most important thing, because it's a prerequisite into making sure that individuals also feel represented. What Proposition's only critique was that people become content with seeing issues, and therefore there's no change that actually happens. We explained number one in third and second that this is not true. Bringing issues to light does not make them content or does not make the average person content with it. If you look at every single social movement that has ever arisen in the history of the world, people become upset when these issues are brought, they change, or to the very least, they understand the issue. And that's the epistemic axis that you're only able to talk about on our side of the house. But secondly, it's that the average person is able to some extent, understand what outcasts are like. Their comparative is one in which they never are aware of these things. And we heard no explanation whatsoever on how, now on their side, the average person knows what the kid sitting in the corner of the lecture hall is thinking about. They can never relate. And when they do bad things, that person is blamed. So we thought that was very, very, very harmful. So the way society changes is through some sort of mass understanding in which you understand and have some sort of empathy towards the people who are outcasts. There is no comparative on their side. We heard no explanation to how these people understand outcasts. It is only via films like The Joker that you're able to understand what is actually going on in the heads of these people. And that was very, very, very important. So the end impact is that the largest impact in this round is how society treats these people and how we view these individuals. Their side is these people are forever a weirdo. On our side, you see why, this alleged weirdo is weird in the very first place. And in the process, they become human because of the fact that you watch movies that relate to them. So in the process, it sheds light on broad issues like mental health, like stigmatization. And that leads to a broader societal understanding of these issues, which leads to more support systems. And you become more likely to talk to, for example, your family. And that we thought was very, very good. On their side of the house, these struggles are ignored. They're never brought to light, which means that the people who experience these things never actually come out because they feel as though it is something that only they experience. It is only when they see their struggles represented in the media, in the communities that form around the media, that they feel like they're less alone. That was why outcasts were better on our side of the house. Secondly, what is a good method to cope? Now, they say, wow, we should just work on yourselves, right? You listen to better music and then now depression is solved and you become more happy. I think the first thing to point out here is that, as we pointed out, this comparative barely exists. The reason as to why people are sad still exists. So the incentive to indulge in sad ways instead of sad outlets to cope with this sort of sadness still exists on their side. And so we thought the more likely comparative is not that you completely improve yourself as an outcast and go out and talk to every single person in the world. Instead, it's that you do drugs, you hurt yourself, and you go shoot up schools. So that was very, very, very harmful. As Proposition tells an outcast to go with friends, when they actually have no friends, and we thought that was very, very bad. Secondly, this does not solve the root cause of why they're sad in the very first place. A man is depressed and blasts Tupac. But what happens when that song is over? They think to themselves, wow, my life is still sad. That was the logic that we thought was very important. The only way that opposition thought was to heal, was to through understanding and validating your own emotions. And you do this through Outcast art, in which you listen to a song or you watch a movie and you're like, wow, they really represent my struggles quite well. And so on an individual level, perhaps on their side, Or perhaps on our side, you have some form of short-term sadness or short-term pain. When you go through a breakup and you listen to Creep, perhaps you're very, very sad in the short term. But in the long term, you're able to accept and validate your emotions through this art. So that's the point at which you actually become better in the future. It's when you come to like standards with your struggles through this sort of art and you're able to understand yourself. That's the only way in which you become better. You never get that understanding on their side of the house. You suppress it in instances, and that's why loneliness is going to be happening on side proposition.
Thank you so much, opposition reply speaker, for that fine speech. Now let's have proposition reply to round up the entire debate. Here.
Panel, note how high the burden the team opposition chose to fight for in this debate is. They want to make a change in the way society functions, what we deem weird, simply by people watching Joker and listening to Creep. We believe that is unrealistic. We did not get enough mechanization on these points. Comparatively, our burden, we believe, despite being lower impact, is simply more realistic, right? It's about people's feelings. It's about the thing we mostly associate with art, right? When we consume art, we probably don't think so much about society and its broader implications. No, it's about just me feeling good. That's exactly what they accepted when they said that art is based upon catharsis. We believe they've accepted our framing of this debate as a debate about emotions when they said that. With that said, in my speech, firstly, some reframing of this debate so we can better understand what this, then two questions, one on society acceptance and then on personal progress. Firstly, let's reframe this debate. Firstly, what exactly does this art look like? We're telling you that, if you recall what I said during my first speaker speech, oftentimes these villains, these people who are outcast in these movies, in these films, etc., are not people who go out and then progress and, I don't know, ask for help, tell people around them about how sad and depressed they feel and get support. No, Joker begins out as lonely and hating society, and he finishes up the exact same way. We don't exactly understand how these people will, I don't know, maybe get more pushed towards seeking out help from others, or how others will maybe try to help them more in that context. We believe that directly interacts with that point. But secondly, we believe that they've severely squirreled this motion by focusing exclusively on actual outcasts. No, we've brought you a lot of mechanization on why a majority of society currently feels like they're outcasts, even though they may not be. They just feel lonely. They project blame. We've brought mechanization of this. There are people who live busy lives and so on. We believe that those are the main actors simply based on the amount that we're talking about, right? Completely uninteracted with. And finally, they tell us about this whole, I don't know, alternative, the fact that it's fine, they can move forward because there's alternative social movements and cultural movements that are happening. We believe that's simply a tension in their case, right? If there's other movements who don't depict this sadness, this loneliness, whatever, and promote progress, we believe that in that case, that takes down a lot of their impacts. With that said, firstly, on acceptance and society acceptance. The main premise that this was based on is simply the fact that a lot of people would be willing to watch art about outcasts, about things they resent, about things that they're averse to, right? What was the mechanism? The fact that people watch art that's not relatable to them. Panel, note, there's a difference in nuance between something not being relatable to you and something being actively aversive to you, right? Sure, I may watch art about things that I don't like, not that I don't like, that I don't necessarily relate to, but comparatively, what we're telling you is exactly the fact that there's things that simply I am averse to. Actors who have profit incentives probably do not want to do those things, right? And secondly, they simply based off this entire clash, the fact that so many people are willing to change, accept, talk to all these people, put in all of this effort just because they watched a movie or listened to some music, we believe that's unrealistic. Comparatively, what we've brought you is a very simple and realistic clash on how you pushed yourself forward, right? Instead of being stuck in your loneliness, constantly being reminded of it by watching this music, constantly sticking in communities where this kind of feeling of loneliness is promoted. What was the only interaction that we got with this point is the fact that you need to sit with your loneliness to accept it and so on. I have brought 3 minutes of framing on how loneliness is separate from sadness, how the different emotions, how loneliness is not something that needs to be sat with, rather something that needs to be pushed for further progress, rather than sadness, which yes, you do need to sit with. These movies target loneliness, not sadness, right? We've told you that you need to move forward. We've told you that we need alternative forms of art that we have mechanized. We've told you why people are likely to turn towards positive art, and we believe that pushes them forward, right? No social movements started out with people just accepting the fact that society sucks and there's nothing to be done about it by shutting themselves in. They all started with people believing they can make a change and being positive. Thank you. Bro.
Thank you so much, Propositional Reply Speaker, for that fine speech. And thank you, everyone else, for that very fine debate. Please give each other virtual handshakes. Commend everyone for the round. And please leave the breakout room so the judges can discuss. You can get the results later on at the main room. Thank you.